to start with the opening. Good morning, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to the defense track of the Warsaw Security Forum's 12th edition. I hope that all of you enjoyed our first day of discussion and that you're ready for more insight and dialogue today. As we discussed yesterday, a shifting strategic landscape and Russia's persistent threats to European regional security mean that Europe as a whole is finally getting serious about its own continental defense and shouldering more to close the transatlantic burden sharing gap. Yesterday, it was the first day of thought-provoking discussions, ideas, and reflections and perspectives on how to think about the future of European continental defense, including from the perspective of rebuilding Europe's land power dimension, strengthening its air and missile defense, how to effectively integrate manned and unmanned assets, how to leverage technology and innovation to drive defense transformation, and how to counter Russia's shadow campaign and hybrid threats. We discussed many of the challenges and opportunities that the current moment presents both for European and transatlantic partners, and how European countries can come together to raise to this moment and through further cooperation, integration, and collaboration, secure the continent from both current and future threats. Today, we will cover even more ground, including a bit more focus on the U.S. perspective on the Transatlantic alliance and how the American approach to European security and defense might evolve in the future. More lessons learned from the front lines of Ukraine's brave fight for survival and self-determination, how to secure Europe's sea and while reviving its maritime industrial capacity, and how to navigate Europe's nuclear dilemma between autonomy, alliance, and deterrence in the current strategic landscape. We will begin today with a panel discussion focusing precisely on the U.S. perspective as a main driver of much of the change that is already unfolded and is unfolding in European defense. But also how the process of reevaluation of U.S. strategic priorities might further shape and influence how American allies might approach current and future developments in European security and defense. Should Europe expect a more limited involvement of the U.S. in existing European security structures? How will the Americans' approach to resolving the war in Ukraine further impact the trajectory of the war, particularly given that significant diplomatic pushes thus far do not seem to have affected President Putin's apparent intention to pursue, if not intensify, its war of aggression against Ukraine? How might European allies fill in potential gaps left behind by the shift in focus of American security policy? And what measures can be put in place or should be put in place if the idea is to transition from burden sharing to burden shifting when it comes to European continental defense? So as you can see, we have a lot to get through during the second day. Thank you once again for joining us. And without further ado, it is my pleasure to invite to the stage the moderator of the first panel of the day, Cienski, Senior Policy Editor of POLITICO Europe. Jan, please do join me on stage.
My name is Jan Cienski, and I'm the defense editor at POLITICO, based in Brussels. And as you can see, the panel today is Securing Europe, Transatlantic Strategies in a Time of War and Uncertainty. And I've been really looking forward to this panel because I think that until now we haven't really heard a strong American voice on these discussions. The WSF has The talk that I've picked up, there's a lot on reaction to Russia, the probing, what we're seeing with the drone probes, the overflights in Estonia, how NATO and the EU should respond to that. There's a lot of talk about support for Ukraine, what the West can do to help Ukraine. But it's going to be really good to get an American voice because the core of all of these issues of how to respond to Russia, how to support Ukraine, rests in a sense on the transatlantic relationship, and I think that hopefully we're going to get a good sense of the pulse of what is a changing transatlantic relationship. So we've got a really great panel with us today. We have Baiba Braže, the Foreign Minister of Latvia, Lieutenant General Keith Kellogg, who's the Presidential Envoy for Ukraine, Markus, who is Switzerland's State Secretary for Security Policy, and Marcin Przydacz, who's the Secretary of State and Head of International Policy Bureau at the Chancellery of the Polish President. Very long title. So, welcome. I'd like to begin maybe on the newsier side of things with General Kellogg. You'd said a few days ago that President Donald Trump is mulling potential approval of long-range strikes by Kiev against Russian targets, and as well that he may approve the purchase of Trident missiles, Tomahawk missiles by Ukraine. Where are we with that? Can you bring us up to speed on what you're hearing from Washington on those issues?
Well, thank you. It's good to be part of the panel today, and thank you very much. To start with, this is the clarifier. I do not speak for the President of the United States, simply because he speaks for himself quite clearly, and he is the one who sets the policy of the United States of America, not Keith Kellogg. Let me start at the back and work my way forward. You asked about the comment about the Tomahawk missiles. The Tomahawk is a very advanced missile system in the United States. It's probably one of our high-end systems. You always read about it when we do a military strike somewhere in the world. It's generally led off by a Tomahawk missile strike. From what I understand, and I was not in the meeting, from what I understand, reading the public reports, is that issue of Tomahawk missiles to Ukraine was brought up by President Cienski to President Trump at the UN General Assembly last week in New York City. There's been no comment either yes it's going to happen or no it's going to happen. The acknowledgement from, again, in the public reports is they were asked for. That is obviously something that has been picked up by the world press, obviously picked up by the Russians as well, simply because of the capability and the capacity of the weapon system. The weapon system is, in fact, by itself, to me, it's a game changer, only because how good it is, and somebody who's seen it used multiple times in multiple conflicts. So that's probably the biggest issue that came out of UNGA in the bilateral discussions that President Cienski and President Trump had. By the way, I have to add this because it's a secondary comment, but it's important as well. The other meeting that occurred there, and I say this because I want to make sure it's understood, is the meeting between our First Lady, Melania Trump, and Mrs. Zelenska, Ilana, when they talked about the children, the 19,500 children that are numbered in The Hague. They've got them captured and bringing them home. Those are two big events that occurred as well. When it comes to the use of the weapon systems on the strikes, is President Trump. I just use his public comments that he's out there. In those comments, you can read about what he said about striking deep and about sanctuaries on what's happening, and those speak for themselves. And I let him do that. That's his call. So it's going to be whatever he makes the final decision as Commander-in-Chief. What's going to be. But I think the biggest news item is the one that you mentioned, was another advanced weapon systems that at least has been asked for, with absolutely no decision being made at all.
What's your sense of, if an approval like that comes, what's your sense of what that would mean for the war?
Yeah, I think, and by the way, this is just Keith Kellogg's personal opinion on that. It's not the administration. But I can go back to my military background. When you get an advanced system like that, the reason why it changes the dynamics of any military conflict is because you add another element of uncertainty or certainty, however you look at it, into the equation. And I think that's important because that's based off the weapon systems that you use. And because it's such a highly capable system, it's sort of like Storm Shadow or Scalp, a system that's out there, something very, very similar. It changes that the dynamic changes because of its range, its capacity, what the target systems you'd use, the targeting you'd use. So those are the kind of things that change your discussions. And I think Peskov, who's the Russian spokesman, even mentioned it. And when you get Peskov's attention, whatever he says, at least you know that it's made some impact on their psyche.
You certainly seem to have woken up in Moscow and sort of raised a whole bunch of issues around the targeting, about if these systems are given to Ukraine, are the Ukrainians able to target themselves? Are the Americans involved in that? And what that would mean for sort of the signal that comes for the level of support that's coming from Washington.
Well, you made a comment, it's signal. You know, when the United States signals something, use the United States. For example, if we send a carrier battle group somewhere, we send a signal. If you send our B-2 somewhere, be it Diego Garcia or whatever, before the strike into Iran, everybody was paying attention where the B-2's at, or stealth bombers. So what you said, you used the word signal. It's right. It's the signal that you send because, militarily speaking, it's getting inside the mental framework of one of the protagonists in the fight.
Great, thanks. The theme of this panel is Transatlantic, and I'd like to ask Minister Braže, you're on the potential front lines, part of the most exposed part of the NATO alliance to Russia. First of all, how concerned are you about the recent U.S. decision to cut training for Eastern Flank countries? Do you, speaking of signals, is that sending a signal?
I think first on various capabilities provided for Ukraine, I think our preference is to see the effect on the battlefield and less talk and more outcomes. And I really don't care how Ukrainians take out those drone factories that currently are producing 8 to 1,000 drones per night, per day. And all the other stuff that Russians have. Ukraine has the right to eliminate legitimate military objects, and we need to supply them with whatever we have to make sure that they are able to self-defend. And then on the transatlantic, our relationship actually is not problematic with the US, and it's very open, very transparent, both in trade, in security, in defense, and everything. And I would like to praise actually our Polish hosts, not only for their generosity, but also for establishing that firm relationship with the new administration. So it's the same for us in the Baltics. For now, no decisions have been made on cutting something or eliminating something. Quite opposite, we have heard some good things from Washington, and that's the way we intend to continue. We fully support President Trump in his quest for peace in Ukraine, peace through strength. That's the way to go, which involves strengthening ourselves, making sure that we do, all of us, spend 5% on defense. In our case, it's 5% core defense spending next year. In other countries, it will be 3.5% core defense and 1.5% for resilience, cyber, and other enablers. Enabling NATO's defense plans spending. Then it involves making sure that Ukraine is able to continue defending herself. That's the second pillar in peace through strength in our view. And third is constraining Russia, because our problem, our crisis is Russia. It's not Ukraine.
You said you've heard good things from Washington. What good things have you heard?
Again, they will be public when they become public.
Okay. There is talk of a potential U.S. recalibration towards the Indo-Pacific. Are you confident going forward of the U.S. commitment to NATO, to your defense, or do you sense a shift in attention out of Washington that could leave you vulnerable?
Listen, what we understand from this administration is they don't want to be the consumer of all our goods anymore. They want to be producer of goods themselves, not only of services. So the change in trade policies and everything else is quite understandable if you look from that perspective. And they also are not content with just being global security provider, while others are not investing what they should be investing, what they can invest, and what the situation requires. And that applies not only to the European allies, it applies also to Indo-Pacific and others. So from my visit to Japan, quite clearly we heard that the US ask for the Indo-Pacific partners is also quite substantial in terms of raising their defense spending, security investment, in response to the real-life challenges that they have, which is North Korea, which is Chinese aggressive and assertive behaviors, the military capabilities, the plans, the exercising, and everything that we are seeing in Indo-Pacific. So those are realities that are out there, and when you look in the future, they are still more prominent, those realities. And those theaters are interconnected. I mean, when we are seeing North Korean soldiers fighting in Ukraine, it was hard to imagine a few years ago, but it's a reality. Right. It's a reality.
Thanks very much. Minister Przydacz, what's the view from Warsaw on the health of the US-European or US-NATO relationship? The Polish president has politically a relatively close relationship with President Trump. Does that give you any insights as to his level of commitment to this traditional transatlantic relationship?
Well, first of all, thank you very much for having us today. You know, for Poland, transatlantic relations are absolutely on the top of our agenda. We need more Americans in Europe and more Europeans in America. That's the priority for Poland. Also having in mind what is happening in the eastern flank and all those challenges coming from the east. That's why constantly throughout the last 3 decades we've been advocating for more American presence in Europe, with a great success in Warsaw 2016 NATO summit and the first decision of deployment of American troops, which was expanded during the Obama first, then first Trump, then Biden, and now we are with the current Trump administration. And as for now, we do not have any negative signals with regard to that, just opposite. In the Oval Office on the 3rd of September, we've heard public statement of President Trump that the American troops will stay in Poland. And with a bit of strategic messaging towards Moscow, I think President Trump also said that there is a chance for further deployment of American troops. We don't know whether it will happen or not. It is also a job for us, for Polish diplomacy, to work on that, to convince them and to provide good conditions for American troops in Poland, because that's the biggest difference between the conditions in Poland and in other Western countries. That in Poland, it is rather on Polish taxpayer the cost of sanctioning of American troops rather than on American taxpayer. And I think it's a quite fair stance, and it is very well understood by President Trump, because what he's saying basically, he says, of course, America first, America has its own challenges domestically and challenges in the Indo-Pacific, and Europe is wealthy enough to pay a bit more for its defense, for its defense budget, its security. So throughout the last 1 year, but if you go back, we could hear that also in Obama and Biden's approaches. Europe should pay more for its security. It was in Newport 2014 we agreed on 2%, and it took a decade for us, for Europeans, to reach that level, and the world is in a completely different position now. That's why we agreed in The Hague to get 5%. I think the situation would be completely different, in a better shape, if Europe were able to fulfill all its commitments. American security umbrella is very much important, but I think there shouldn't be any free rides, in Europe. So I'm quite confident that if European allies are able to pay more for its security, the engagement of the US in Europe will be visible. Maybe not at the same level as it was before, but we can see that even in those negotiations with Kiev, Moscow, Trump is very much engaged in this discussion. But what he needs to see is Europe stepping up and moving forward with regards to its own responsibility, and to help, of course, Americans to play their foreign policy in different parts of the world.
Thanks. Poland recently had the overflight by the Russian drones. About 3 were shot down. What is your assessment of President Trump and generally Washington's response to that incursion? To my mind, it wasn't as full-throated as one would possibly expect from Washington. But what's the view from Warsaw on that?
Well, I'm the official of President Nawrocki's administration, so you cannot expect from me to publicly criticize our main ally. You know what was our stance? We took the decision to take the kinetic action, to shut them down, and the reaction of the entire alliance was very promising. We got support from every single ally, politically or in kind, fulfilling the Eastern Century program announced by the Secretary General. When it comes to the American reaction, there was a phone call between President Nawrocki and President Trump, and I was there listening what President Trump said, and said, guys, you had an incursion into your airspace. So it was your legitimate reaction to shut them down, absolutely, since it was a provocative step taken by Russia. So once someone is provoking you, then you need to react to that. But what we need to be aware, and it's the end of the quotation is my opinion, President Trump is in a process of negotiations. So when you negotiate, then probably you're trying to get the proper wording for every single action. So of course we would like to see maybe a bit more open comments from Washington, but we are happy with the political endorsements. We are okay with the fact that that there was a political clearance also to the entire NATO to react properly, and we will react whenever it's needed, because as we agreed in Vilnius summit, NATO summit, every single inch of NATO territory should be defended. So the reaction will be appropriate, and I'm pretty sure that both Americans and the European allies will not only acknowledge that, but they will say that it was a proper reaction.
Great, thanks. We've got a interesting addition on the panel because it's Switzerland, which is obviously part of the West, but slightly to the side historically. So I'd like to ask Minister Matter, while NATO rearms and the EU ramps up its defense spending, and there's this sort of a lot of conversation about where the state of the relationship with the United States, where does that leave neutral countries like Switzerland? Are you kind of on the outside of the window looking in? Are you part of the talks? Where are you going with this?
Yeah, first of all, I think you already stated the obvious. It's not obvious to have a Swiss representative on this panel for this topic. So thank you for the invitation. I think it gives me the opportunity to rectify maybe one or the other myth about Switzerland. Yes, we're not a member of NATO. We're not a member of the European Union. And at first sight, that makes us look very different. But when you have a closer look, I would argue we are actually not that different. We consider ourselves as an integral part of European security. We have the same values as our European neighbors. We have the same security interests, and we also share the same threat perception as regards to the European security situation these days. And yes, we adhere to the law of neutrality, because neutrality remains crucial for Switzerland's foreign and security policy, and it somehow has also become part of our national identity. And we have to accept that. It's part of our history and of our geography over centuries of European wars, a small state having to find a concept of survival in that. However, and I think this is really important, neutrality does not mean indifference, and it does not mean abstention. We are on the side of international law. We take clear positions, and in the case of the Russian aggression against Ukraine, we have condemned that from the beginning. We have also adopted the EU sanctions, and we support Ukraine. However, we have a different toolbox. We do not support in a military sense. This is not possible as a neutral state, but we provide diplomatic support, financial, humanitarian aid, refugee support, and all the things we can do within this framework. Where does that leave us regarding European security? I think we are, as I said, an integral part of it. We would like to support and provide or contribute to European security. And we talked a lot about unity yesterday and today, and we would like to be part of that unity. But I think in this unity there is also diversity, and I think Switzerland is a good example for this. We bring different assets or qualities to the table, not so much in the military realm, but with some other possibilities we can provide. And we can maybe dive into that later, but we do have ideas where we can make additional contributions to European security.
Does that leave you in danger as these as the defense budgets increase and these vast flows start to move and Europe rearms, that Switzerland, which has a significant defense sector, simply gets frozen out? That you're not part of the club, and so you're not going to be part of the EU rearmament programs. You'll economically lose out.
Yeah, absolutely. You hit the spot. This is really a danger. It's also in the Swiss interest to make sure that we can be part also of the economic or more defense-related rearmament programs. And we have certain self-restrictions according to Swiss war material legislation. We cannot provide direct military export to countries at war. And that obviously, in a current situation in Europe, is a hindrance to our own defense industry. This legislation is now being debated in Swiss Parliament because a majority of our Parliament has identified this restriction and has identified the disadvantage we also put ourselves on. And I would say, cautiously optimistic that our Parliament will be able to rectify that, to revise the legislation in a way that we can get rid of some of these restrictions. But it's in the hand of Parliament, and in Switzerland, political debates take time, but we have, let's say, we have identified the problem, not solved it yet.
Great, thanks very much. The first part, we sort of talked a little bit about more, I guess, the hard power side, the military supplies and that sort of thing. But I guess the transatlantic community since the war has also had a strong values base, that we're a community of like-minded countries that see the world in a very similar way. And so it's not just a transactional relationship, but we're actually friends and who can count on each other. So I'll ask General Kellogg, with the changes happening in the United States, with the direction that Donald Trump is taking the U.S., is that community of values of liberal democracy still function in NATO, or is NATO shifting to a more transactional relationship with a different United States than has historically been the case?
Yeah, I think the answer is yes. What I mean by that is both. Stepping back just from some of the comments being made, I don't think, and I've served in Europe before when I was in the U.S. military, studied it, in school and everything. I don't think I've ever seen the alliance this strong in my career, in my life. I've never seen this united, and I think it's a real credit to all of the members. You brought up an interesting point, and I think it's a good one. And I think it's a Western value overall. There is a moral equivalence to what you do, and I think we've all, as people who've served in the West, live in the West, and know that it's a values-based system as well. And I don't think no one's moved away from that with the United States. They always see that. But the other part of it, and you said it because it's a great word to use, there is a transactional relationship. And that transactional relationship, and I'll use it because you brought it up earlier about, it goes back when the first Trump administration, when we talked about NATO, and in the Wales Declaration. And the Wales Declaration was every nation in NATO would do 2.5% of their GDP on defense, of that which was 20% on modernization. That's transactional. When we came in 2017, after the 2016 election, there were only like 3 nations in NATO that were making that 2.5%. And now, and especially now being led actually by Poland, when they went up to the 5%, that's a transactional relationship. It's a quid pro quo. So the answer is yes on both sides. So is it transactional? Yes, it is. You put out the 2.5%, or you put out the 5%, we'll match the 5%. You do certain things, we'll do certain things. And Europe is doing that as well. At the same time, we all kind of understand there's a moral aspect to everything that occurs as well. But again, that's a Western value, right, and something that I grew up with, that most of the people in this room have grown up with, and you just kind of accept that as part of it. And I don't think there's any really sea change. I think if the question is based off on what's called America First, I was probably one of the first guys. The guy who leads America First is Trump, but I started in 2015 with President Trump. And I remember the first question I ever got from a reporter was a gentleman by the name of Benji Sarlin, who was at MSNBC in 2016, and he said, "Is America First isolationist?" And because he was thinking back to 1939 and the America First movement, which at that time was a very strong isolationist movement. I said, "No, not at all." He said, "It's what it says." It goes back to our American Constitution, where the 3 first words of the Constitution are "we the people," boldly put. And I said, it all depends on what's happening in America. You look at Americans first. If it's good for America, it's good for everybody else. And that goes back to the principles we had in the 2015-16 campaign. So your answer's a good one, but it's duality to it. The duality is it's both transactional and moralist-based out there. And I don't think they're in conflict with one another. I think they can be done and being interacted with both. But again, and I'll close this circle, but I think it a real credit to the alliance right now is the unity that you see. And I said this last week. In fact, you were in the room when I said it. Last week we were UN General Assembly. I don't think Europeans, you realize how good you really are. You are really good at what you're doing. And you don't need, it's good to have the United States with you in compliance, but you can handle things on your own pretty well. Okay? Sometimes it's sort of like, for lack of a better term, I'll give you, it's a crappy probably analogy, but I'll use it anyway. It's sort of like when my kids were learning to ride a bicycle, you started with training wheels. Europe doesn't need any training wheels. You're quite good on your own right now. And I think that's important to know, and the confidence that you're there. You can handle any situation that you get involved with. And I use not a diplomatic or an economic comment. I'll use a military comment about this. I'll just give you an example. And I'll use one because we brought up at the very start weapon systems. If you look at the most advanced fighters in the world, the F-35 and the F-22, what we call fifth generation fighters, today I can give you 6 European nations that have invested in the F-35 program. You can put up, or we'll be able to put up very soon, 400 F-35s in the air. The most the Russians can put up are 100. You can sweep the skies with the F-35s without a single American F-35 up. And when you look at things like what the Dutch have done, giving the F-16s to Ukraine, the shoot-downs of some of those drones of F-16s, it's there. And I would just say to the alliance, you're better than you think you are. And they have a lot of confidence in that.
Great, thanks. I was sort of touching on approach to liberal democracy and political divides. Poland is very deeply politically divided. We heard, I guess, from one half of that divide yesterday, where the ministers from the government, Minister Przydacz is on the other side of that divide with the presidential administration, where sometimes conflict, sometimes the two sides get together.
That's democracy.
That's democracy. What's your view of how that political split in Poland, which I guess is sort of replicated in the political split that we see in the United States as well, how does that affect security policy, and how does that affect the relationship, the transatlantic relationship as well? These discordant voices coming out of Warsaw.
Well, I want to believe, and I'm pretty sure that it does not have a real negative impact on our security policy. When it comes to our security agenda, fulfilling the commitments of NATO, investing in our army, buying equipment, mostly American equipment, but also Korean and European and our own, there is a continuation. I mean, this what was started by the previous center-right government. There is a continuation under current administration, and President Nawrocki is continuing the mission of President Duda with regard to that. When it comes to the deterrence, and not only deterrence policy towards Russia, there is a continuation. When it comes to our support, political and not only political, towards Ukraine, there is a continuation. If there are any splits, of course, which are quite natural in democracy, as I just said, there are rather, with regard to the domestic things, European policy. I mean, the role of Poland and the status of Poland within the EU. There are some differences. The conservative parts thinks that we need to be a bit more, I would say, ambitious and active, rather than listening to what the Brussels says. The difference is that the conservative part thinks that the European Union. I mean, the owners of the European Union are the nation states, not the opposite. It's not the Brussels which is ruling the sovereign countries. It is just opposite. The sovereign countries should be ruling Brussels. That's the difference. When it comes to transatlantic agenda, I've just said it is on the top of our priority for conservatives, for sure. When it comes to the current liberal left administration, there were many things. Unfortunately, bad things said in previous times about President Trump, and it does not give them the chance to establish good personal contact with Trump's administration. So that's why probably they are very much concentrated on relations with Berlin, with Brussels, rather than with Washington. But having in mind what General said about the bicycle, so we can say that there are two wheels in this bicycle. So the president and the conservative party is working on the transatlantic agenda, while the liberal left, they are trying to establish even better relations with European allies, encouraging both parts of this Euro-Atlantic family to be active on the eastern flank, sanctioning Russia, supporting Ukraine, etc., etc. So from my perspective, it's rather a positive image rather than the negative one.
Yeah, thanks. Minister Braže, do you, you said that you think that NATO is strong, you don't question the American role in NATO. Do you still consider there to be a transatlantic community of values? And do you also have the sense that, you certainly pick it up looking from the outside, that there's a lack of certainty among many European countries as to predicting policy shifts in Washington, and for example, when after Alaska, when there's this rush of European leaders to Washington, so you get a sense of the delicacy of the relationship, that no one's quite certain of the ground on which they stand on, and what the direction is going forward. Do you pick that up as well? What's your view on that?
Let me start by saying that one day I would like to see the Swiss F-35s also taking down the Russian drones above Poland. But
I think that qualifies as a zing, right?
And that's about values. The values in NATO is indeed, that's what it is about. When you look at NATO's Atlantic Charter, Washington Charter, is just 14 articles, very clear articles, very short, one of the best legal texts I've seen. But what people forget is that NATO is based on the UN Charter, United Nations Charter, Article 51, the right to self-defense, individually or collectively. And that is the very essence of NATO. It's a defense alliance. So it's self-defense. And that's the same article Ukraine is defending herself on. And that's why when the war started, one of the first things NATO did was to call together all the legal advisors to understand where in international law, how far can we go in providing aid, military aid and other aid. And it was very clear. Providing military aid for self-defense does not make you a party to the war. And that's both for our Swiss colleagues, but also for other neutral countries who are not yet providing military aid to Ukraine. And in our view, part of those transatlantic values is to provide military aid to Ukraine. Whether that's authorization of certain weaponry, whether it's money, whether it's actual kit, and all the other stuff that a country implementing UN Charter's Article 51 needs. And that's what, for me, is transatlantic values.
Great, thanks. Minister Mader, you, interesting comment there a second ago. Is there a debate in Switzerland to follow the track of Sweden and Finland and simply, as part, to just join the Western Alliance, join NATO? And should there be?
When you look at the polls in Switzerland, there is no majority for a NATO membership. But what is interesting is that for the last several years, there is a clear majority of the population which supports even closer cooperation with NATO and with, let's say, with Europe in the security and defense sphere. And this is what actually we would like to exploit. We are intent on increasing and intensifying our cooperation, both bilaterally and multilaterally within Europe. And I think we're on a good track there within the framework I have described before. And one interesting thing is, just maybe a small anecdote. We had the visit of the Supreme Allied Commander Europe a few years ago in Switzerland. At that time it was General Gavoli. And he actually visited Switzerland about a half year after taking this post, and he requested this visit, and we felt privileged. But when he arrived, we asked him, why did you choose to visit Switzerland without even having visited all NATO members? And then he told us that he described the map of his military strategic responsibility, and he showed us this picture of, you see, it looks like a donut, and in the middle of this donut there is a hole. And me, as the Supreme Allied Command Europe, would like to understand the security and defense posture of this area, and I would like to have a relationship of trust with Switzerland. And this is also in the interest of Switzerland. So it showed us that there's things we can actually provide, and I think this is even more important in in an age of hybrid and grey zone activities. There is not just one front. All the terrain, all Europe is important. As we see, there are certain activities which can happen in different places, and we would like to intensify this cooperation in security and defense. We are in the process of finalizing a new ITPP, so the partnership program between NATO and Switzerland, and that's on good tracks. We are also trying to increase our cooperation with the European Union in security and defense related issues. And as our colleague from Lithuania mentioned before, Latvia, we are in the process of purchasing the F-35. And I think this is also an important bilateral cooperation with the United States, which has been well established for many years and which we are confident will be maintained in the years ahead.
Thanks. Minister Braže wanted something, but we'll also take questions. So if you've got a brief question, please get it ready, put your hand up, and I think we have a microphone that'll be going around. And if you also identify yourself, and we'll have that right after Minister Braže.
No, absolutely. As for Sakir having in his AOR area of responsibilities that sort of unclear point I remember from my NATO times that we were discussing and wondering, you know, what's in the times of the war, how best to proceed. So it's great to hear that there was this exchange. But on just to finish up on the Baltic, US and transatlantic relationship, I would like to underline that it's such a comprehensive relationship. I mean, we have large Baltic communities in the US. We have US present in the Baltics in various ways. And in foreign policy, we are 3 of the 36 countries not recognizing Palestine, and we don't intend to do so in the nearest future unless something substantively changes. And we see this push for peace in the Middle East that we saw last night as a very welcome development. If that leads to the proper two-state solution, I think that will be one of the best news for all of us possible. And, you know, also on the energy economic field, in the security field, the relationship is so deep and comprehensive that transatlantic sort of partnership, alliedship with the US is what probably characterizes the Baltics, and I guess Poland the most among all.
Great, thanks. And if there, do we have the microphone? Yes. So, there's a hand right there. So.
Good morning. My name is Alexei Minshonek. I'm from Belarus. I'm an independent journalist of Zerkala media outlet. General Kellogg, I want to ask, is it a good deal for United States if Belarus releases fewer political prisoners that it takes hostage? At the beginning of September, it was less than at the end of September after minus those released with help of US. What do you think about this?
Sorry, that there's more political prisoners now than there were at the time of the deal with the Lukashenko government. Gotcha.
Well, I think we all know who President Lukashenko is, and we understand what's happening in Belarus. Let me give you a little bit of a background on that. Is to President Trump's credit, he has reached out to a lot of different people to try to get some type of resolution on this war, and we want to make sure that we have multiple avenues of approach, not just one. So in Lukashenko, we know, talks to President Putin a lot. We're not sure what he says, but we know that he talks to him. When we initially started to go there, and the gentleman who actually set this up was a gentleman by the name of John Cole, who's actually my deputy, was one of the lawyers for President Trump in a lot of the social media cases that are going on. And when we went into Belarus, and he went in initially, and he got some of the prisoners out, I think it was 14 was the first one, we as this American saying goes, we just didn't fall off the turnip truck. You know, we know that if he releases one, he probably picks up 2 more. But what we did, we established a relationship to ensure the lines of communication were open so we could make sure all of our messaging was being passed to President Putin. That was the reason we did it. We weren't going in there initially to get political prisoners out. They started with 14, then they got more the last time they went in. And he has well over 1,000 political prisoners. And getting them out is an upside to what is going on. And we know that. So understand in diplomacy the reason we did it. There was an ulterior motive to make sure. And we've established that relationship. There's nothing wrong with not talking to adversaries or friends as well. I believe that was one of the mistakes of the last administration when, for example, our U.S. President, President Biden, didn't even pick up the phone and talk to Putin at all about the war. Well, when you get involved in diplomacy, that's wrong. You've got to talk to your adversaries. I mean, my experience and my knowledge and my study of history, that's done all the time. So that's the reason we did that. So we also are not naive. We know exactly what he's doing. Don't think for a minute that we're not. We are. So, but we're trying to think of an ulterior motive, what we're trying to do. We're trying to accomplish something. And part of that accomplishment, the overall objective of that was not to free political prisoners. The overall objective was find a resolution to the best way we can to the war between Ukraine and Russia. How do we do that? And how do we make sure that the messages we're being sent to Vladimir Putin are consistent with the messages that have gone to other circles? I don't care if it's Kirill Dmitriev. I don't care if it's Ushakov. I don't care if it's Lukashenko. The fact is making sure those messages come across. So understand why we do that. You know, don't think of the hostages issue. Of course we know he's going to take hostages. You know, in all probability, he gives one up, he takes two back. Understood. But we're going to give up. And to give John Cole, my deputy, full credit for what he's doing, that he's actually been able to bring out numerous numbers of those prisoners. And if we got just one, it's a win. And so we've got a lot more than one. So to me, I give him full credit for what he's done.
Great, thanks very much. Is there another question? Right there?
Hi, my name is Amanda Rifkin-Hassler. I'm Latvian American. I'm also working with my husband, Georg, to set up a burn security dialogue. This question is for our Swiss panelist. Having lived in Switzerland the last few years, observed rather tedious debates around the acquisition of the F-35, watched the Patriot missile batteries intended for Switzerland go to Ukraine, as they should. What is the plan for when there's actually hostilities, as they have initiated them in Switzerland? And what do you say to somebody like me, whose husband would be certainly called up to fight in the event of, and is currently not here because he's in operational training?
I didn't understand the second part of the question acoustically. Could you repeat that?
Yes, and what do you say to somebody like me, whose husband would certainly be called up to fight in the event that there are an outbreak of hostilities, and who isn't here now because he's currently in operational training?
With what country?
Switzerland.
Oh, okay.
So regarding the F-35 and Patriot, yes, the deliveries for the Patriots meant to be for Switzerland had to be reprioritized. Of course, that's a challenge for Switzerland, but I think in the grand scheme, we understand it's for the good of European security, and we are in close discussion with our American partners and also our German partners to make sure that we find a way to actually train our troops without losing time and then be ready for a later delivery. So all in all, I think this is something we can manage. And regarding the F-35, we do not expect any delay in the delivery. The program is going on. When you live in Switzerland, you surely have followed the debate about the financing. And I think there are certain solutions to make sure we can abide by the parliament's and the population's decisions. And the Ministry of Defense will come up with a solution or with a proposal by the end of November, December.
Great, thanks. We probably have time for one or two more questions. Any more? Yes, one right on the side over there.
Thank you. My name is Jacob. I cover American politics in Danish. Question for you, General Kellogg. Given Trump's recent statements potentially delivering Tomahawk missiles to Ukraine, is it your personal opinion that Donald Trump is now more firmly on the side of Ukraine than he was early in his presidency?
No, I think he's been. I think it's. You asked my personal opinion. I'm glad you said that because it's not policy. Because that's the president's lane. I think he's been meaning President Trump. I think he's been exceptionally balanced, and that's what he tries to do. He tries to be as somebody who's, for lack of a better term, I'll use it, as an intermediary. You can't, to get to a final decision or to get to an agreement. He's trying to make sure he's got a balanced view on both sides. When I say, anybody who's ever been involved in negotiations at a diplomatic level understands that you can't just go to one side or go to the other side. That's not how it works. And so the negotiation, how he does it, it's his own style. It's a very personal style, which he's always had. There's really no secret to it. I've always advised people. I said, if you really want to know how to work that, read what he's written. Read The Art of the Deal or whatever that's, or a book called Crippled America, or whatever you want to call it. It kind of shows how President Trump works, the actions he's going. So it's a balanced view, and I think that's good. And that's the reason why he's been able to talk to President Putin up in Alaska. He's been able to talk to President Zelensky, both in the White House and up just last week when they were at the UN General Assembly up in New York City. So I give him full credit for that. I mean, he's got a style. It's a very personal style, and he does a good job with it. But I think he's going. He sits and he runs right down the middle, and that's in a public statement. That's the best thing I think he could do. He lets the hard work be done by others. Meaning, I don't mean that in a negative way, but it's like anybody. If you're involved in business, that's the reason why you have a COO, Chief Operating Officer, or action officers involved. They do what we call in America, they call it scut work. Do the hard work, and then the CEO of a company or the leader of a company, president, chancellor, prime minister, will come in and close the deal. So it's stylistic, but I think it's very, very important that you have to be as impartial as you can to get to a relation to bring both sides to a table, both sides that are frankly very intractable right now, which is understandable. I mean, you have to sit back and kind of take a deep breath and look at it. It's a great question, but I think there's a lot of nuance to it that when you're involved in either diplomacy or even in business as well, you'll see in the end state and how it's done.
Great, thanks. I think we have time for one very, very short question at the end.
Thank you very much. My name is Irina Zuckerman. I'm from the United States. My question is to General Kellogg. There is a concern that lifting sanctions on Belarus will help Russia circumvent sanctions. What is the administration's position on this?
The sanctions on who?
Belarus.
Belavia, on the Belarusian airline. That would be a circumvent the aviation.
You're talking about the sanctions on the airline. When we went in and talked to President Lukashenko, and I was there with John Cole, when we actually went into Minsk and we talked about it, it's really pretty simplistic. It's what I mean by that is, when you talked about the airline is primarily flies Boeing parts. The preferred option is that their airplanes don't fall out of the skies. Okay. Now, the second part of that, because there's an underlying comment to that. That was when we were at UN General Assembly last week. We talked about it. The other one is you fix your airline so your airplanes don't fall out of the sky, but they also don't use them for other purposes. For example, flying migrants into Belarus and then they cross the borders. And sometimes that happens. That is the sense. Okay, we see what's going on. Don't take us as fools. But the comment we make to them is, fix your airlines so you can fly your airplanes with parts that are primarily Boeing parts, and you lift that sanction, that part of it, and this was fully discussed, but you don't use them for nefarious purposes. So that's the bottom line.
Great, thanks. And I think that we are smoothly coming to the end of our panel. I'd like to thank the panelists for taking part. I guess as a final comment, I was struck by General Kellogg by what you were saying, which I think sort of hits at the heart of where we are with the transatlantic relationship. You were saying that Donald Trump wants to take a balanced view on both sides with the Ukraine war. And I guess this is one of the potential shifts is, should the U.S. be taking a balanced side, or should the U.S. be an ally of Ukraine, which means you can't be balanced because you are fully in one camp. And so I guess that's the thought going forward is the U.S. fully in the camp, or are they shifting to a different position, which is, I think, something that we're going to be looking at over the rest of the Warsaw Security Forum. I'm kind of leaving it.
I think the question you had there is a good one to answer is, when you talk about balance, I think when you're a negotiator in diplomacy, you have to have balance. And I would say, very simply put, how much equipment, when you talk about balance, how much equipment is the United States military sending to Russia to use against Ukrainians? None. How much are they sending in supporting the alliance to Ukraine? So when you look at a leadership level, I think if anybody who's ever been involved in negotiations, you understand you have to have a balanced view to make sure you can bring to a conclusion. The biggest thing we want to do is stop the largest land war in Europe since World War II. And this is a war at industrial strength with over hundreds, not 1,000 or 2,000. We're talking hundreds, plural, of thousands of killed in action there. Afghanistan, Russians came out after losing 18,000. We left Vietnam after losing 65,000. We're now talking of the level of death and dead and wounded on both sides have eclipsed 1 million. Stunning. And so I think this war needs to come to an end in some way.
Thank you very much on that closing note, and I'd like to thank the panelists for taking part, and to the audience.